Ndewo. Ndewo. Are there Igbos here? Ndị Igbo nnọkwa here? M ga-ekwu Igbo kwenu unu ga-aza. Then m ga-ebikwe n'asụsụ ndị Owerri ka m si ebikwe. Onwe ndị ga-azakwa here. Then ndị nwoke unu abịakwa unu otu unu si eme ya ka ọ daa ụda. Ihe ọ na London. Anyị nwakwa ndị Igbo ndị nọ mgbe ụwa bidoro, ndị bidoro ụwa. So anyị ga Ndewo no. Igbo kwenu. Igbo kwenu. Ndị Igbo kwezuenu. Nwaanyị ndị Igbo kwenu. Ụmụ nwoke anaghị anụkwa? Listen.
Anambra kwenu? Yes. Ebonyi kwenu? Yes. Imo kwenu? Yes. Abia kwenu? Yes.
Delta. Delta. Thank you very much. The title of my conversation is The Continuum of Igbo Women's Dynamic Activism from Orature to the Digital Age. I'm Rose Ure Mezu, a professor from Morgan State University, Baltimore, USA. Let me start by really thanking the conveners of this extraordinary conference. Why I came. I came because the title was so captivating, I just could not, I couldn't bear it. I couldn't bear not to come. So that's why I traveled all the way across continents to be here. And let's maintain a brief silence for generations of Igbo women who are gone to their reward. Our foremothers, our grandmothers, our mothers, your mothers, and also my mother, Besi Chege Iwuji Okeke, and all the community other mothers, and in particular, a most distinguished Igbo woman activist and scholar, Professor Catherine Acholono of They Lived Before Adam fame. The African-American Pan-African icon, William Edward Booker Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, in What is Civilization? And he had Africa's answer. He says, 3 things Africa has given the world, and they form the essence of African culture: beginnings, the village units, and art in sculpture and music. And to that I say that Igbo womanhood presently is and has been always integrally implicated in these 3 things: beginnings, the village units, and art in sculpture and music. This is the primordial Igbo woman. If according to a plethora of scholarly findings, Ndi Igbo lived before Adam, and the original Adam and Eve were Igbo, you could call them Igbo. Igbo, from where is derived even Hebrew, Igbo, Hebrew. I can assure you, Eve, or the Igbo Eve, was not sitting on a chaise longue or on a lazy chair recliner with legs spread out in indolent ease, sipping champagne or palm wine or whatever else, whatever other exotic drink, while the Igbo Adam walked his bones dry. The image of the pedestalized woman will be one that the European colonizers will foist on Africans. The woman who will be there doing nothing but causing mischief, as can be seen from the activities of the mistress in Ferdinand Oyono's 1956 Vie du Bois. When Western Europe colonized Africa, the colonizers brought with them this perspective that depicted women as the weaker sex, fragile, helpless, passive, idealized, exotic, accessory to the educated African male. But this was the way the Europeans of that period conceived of their own women, dwelling in indolent leisure. And in an Igbo African cultural setting already known for its patriarchal sexism, this additional negative stereotype of woman idealized only as the homemaker, or at best as Nneka, worsened matters for Igbo and other sub-Saharan African women. Obviously, Europe's colonial adventure into Igbo land had economic repercussions. It destroyed Igbo women's traditional cultural autonomy, their inbuilt economic power base, and their freedom to move around from home to the farm and then back home again and from there to the market to sell their produce. Expatriate firms were set up, such as John Holt's, United Africa Company, USC, and Lever Brothers, and these took over and monopolized the sale of the essential products like palm oil, palm kernel, and other economic products that Igbo women were actually in control of. And Igbo women, besides, were denied access to medium and large-scale loans, which facilitated bulk purchase of these products during the colonial economy. Now, as I said, your conference title was just too intriguing and captivating. And so I will try and give you my own definition of woman, Igbo woman being. Woman being. I think that's the axle on which this conference rests. No. Igbo African women were never indolent, and they did not just sit in languorous ease. Erimbe, which means from time immemorial. You'll be hearing it often. Now, go with me. Erimbe. Erimbe. Again, erimbe. Erimbe. Whenever I say erimbe, know that it means from time immemorial. Erimbe. The Igbo woman has had active and alive her woman being. That's holistically harmonious, functionally multifaceted, innermost depth of her being, both her physical and spirit space. Let me repeat it. Woman being, holistically harmonious, functionally multifaceted, innermost depth of both her physical and spirit space. So this completely rounded, functional, physical, and sacred space is what I believe this women's conference has so aptly termed woman being. Therefore, Erimbe, Igbo women had and still has her woman being steeped first and foremost in her home, in farm work, in communal culture, economic entrepreneurship, and the arts and religion. Thus, Igbo women's dynamism of participation in nation building stretches from the dawn of time, uninterrupted, up to our modern digital age. That's my claim. And it is from this prism that I plan to launch our conference conversation on Igbo womanhood, her personhood, and that holistically harmonious, functionally multifaceted innermost depth of both her physical and spirit space that we now have agreed is woman being. Since this writer believes in the complementarity of the sexes, I argue, therefore, that Igbo woman being and personhood will be incomplete without looking at the other half of the equation with whom she constitutes Ndi Igbo. After all, it is Igbo men, like my husband, whom I love very much, and who is sitting here. It is Ndi Igbo men, who help Igbo women to form Igbo nation. So the logical question to ask is, who are Ndi Igbo? And who are Ndi Igbo? Ndi Igbo are a rugged, very rugged, industrious, entrepreneurial, at times loud-mouthed, but very competitive people whose very curious and adventurous spirit has led them to every habitable corner of the planet Earth, from Arctic region to the Antarctica. Igbo language and people, far from being on the verge of extinction, are today believed to be facing an irrepressible renaissance. Ndi Igbo are indeed looking at a space beyond Nigeria and Africa and seeing the world as their new theater of operation, and that's what's happening here. This Igbo Women Conference is an admirable example of Igbo entrepreneurial spirit. In fact, of Igbo women's verve and panache and organic dynamism with which they have erimbe, defined, nurtured, sustained, and codified Igbo identity. And hey, look at us. Just look at us. The creme de la creme of educated Igbo womanhood, gathering ourselves together from all corners of the globe and doing what Igbo women do best, bringing together in a life-promoting conversation the Igbo family, Igbo community, Igbo nation, and eventually the world. This type of life-affirming enterprise, Igbo women have done a rimbe at home and in the public square, such as the marketplace. And they are doing it now with the resources of our global digital media space. It is no wonder that the Yoruba scholar and Pentecostal pastor Femi Aribisala has this to say of Ndi Igbo. Even the bitterest adversaries of the Igbo cannot but admit that as a people, they are very resourceful and ingenious. Indeed, this has often been the cause of their envy and dislike by others. Among the different ethnic groups in Nigeria, the Igbo are without a doubt one of the most remarkable. We salute the Igbo for their fortitude and implore them to stake their claim to Nigeria. Nigeria cannot survive without Ndi Igbo. And so, as an Igbo woman and the Igbo women here, we concur with this confessional statement from a member of a rival group, the Yorubas, vying with Ndi Igbo for leadership in Nigeria. Yes, Nigeria without Ndi Igbo can never be called Nigeria. What is Igbo nation? If you ask any knowledgeable Igbo about Ali Igbo, Igbo nation, the speaker, not surprisingly, may lapse into poetic mysticism. In the lived before Adam, prehistoric origins of the Igbo, the never been ruled, we hear the voice of one Igbo woman, the late distinguished Igbo writer and scholar, Catherine Obianujua Acholonu, wax lyrical about Igbo nation. She calls Igbo nation a people, she says, whose cosmology is rooted in the numbers 4 and 8. These are their market days. A people who emanated from the realm of the eternal day, a kingless people, with no kingdom over them, because they are all kings. Igbo enweze. They are all kings. Igbo enweze. A people who venerate the primal goddess, Allah. Orature group call it Ani. A people among whom existed the three entities, father, mother, and child, in a Trinitarian bond and speech, having within it the three names abiding in three na ne wata. Na ne wata. Nwoke nwanyi wata. Na ne wata. Nwoke nwanyi wata. Ni a Trinitarian bond. As codified in the Nag Hammadi Trinity. The Nag Hammadi Trinity in Egypt, also called the African Gospel of Jesus Christ, calls these people Igbo the first sons of the true God, and says of them, they are the immortal within the mortal, and they will condemn the gods of chaos and their powers. Acholonu goes on to quote painstaking research findings and scientific discoveries in archaeology, paleontology, the study of human fossils, genetic and DNA engineering, linguistics, but also ancient esoteric records, lost scriptures, mythologies of Africa, Europe, and Asia, as well as oral histories and traditions of various nations and continents of the world that reveal the Igbos as the single oldest group of people on planet Earth. Igbos, the single oldest people on planet Earth. Acholonu's research findings reveal that Igbo presence on earth goes all the way to early man, otherwise called Homo erectus, direct ancestor of Homo sapiens sapiens, modern man, thinking man, otherwise called Adam. It is said that Adam spoke a language very close to the Igbo language still spoken today. And that through him and his seeds, Igbo culture was dispersed in its earliest form throughout the first world, starting from Africa, and eventually took roots in ancient Palestine, Asia, Europe, the Americas, to name but a few, and subsequently gave culture and civilization to the rest of the human race. Igbo linguistic, cultural, philosophical, and ideological gifts to the world, which have survived today, are legion, and they include democracy and monotheism. You know, the Igbo had always believed in one God. And that was why, of all the groups anywhere in the world, the Igbos accepted Christianity without going to war, because a whole lot of what we believed. One supreme God, Christianity, one supreme God. We call him Chukwu, and we say Chukwuka, Chukwuka, God is supreme. The others are minor gods, messengers, intermediaries through which we access to the supreme God. If they fail us, we go straight to Chukwuka, supreme God. And so, but even before Acholonos, they lived before Adam. Renowned Igbo historian Professor Adiele Afibo and archaeologist Efena Nozia and others in the field have published researches that actually buttress Acholonos' findings. In fact, the blurb of the 2-volume book, Igbo Nation, History, Challenges of Rebirth and Development, edited by Professors S. Okechukwu Mezu, my husband, and T. Uzodimma Nwala, has this to say, and I quote, "Present state of Igbo studies and research tend to lend credence to the postulation that Ndi Igbo were part of the original inhabitants of the earth before their migration to the other parts of the world as we know it today. And a careful look at the study of the world cartography shows that at the pristine stage of evolving creation, Erimbe, the world was one single, contiguous, undivided mass of earthland, with Africa at the center, before the continents of North and South America and other islands, Australia, Arctic region, and Antarctica, floated away due to seismic upheavals. One undistinguishable mass until seismic upheaval made these other continents float away. These floatings carried away some of the original Igbo inhabitants, who then struggled and succeeded in surviving in sometimes very hostile conditions, and thus became the dark continents of the Americas, Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. So it is my assertion that in the Igbo, men and women are not plagued with the double consciousness as defined by W.E.B. Du Bois. Because in the Igbo know who they are. They know their relevance and their contributions to world civilizations, as I have outlined. Socio-cultural background, Igbo patriarchy. Having established the origin, identity, and character traits of the Igbo, one might ask, were ancient Igbo people oppressively masculinist? Sadly, my answer will have to be yes. But in the same misogynist way that most ancient societies were in those days, and still largely are, even in our modern times. For instance, ancient Greeks in their hubris believed that Greek women were inferior to them physically, socially, intellectually, even in physical beauty. The Greek man thought that he was more good-looking, well-toned, better looking than the Greek woman. And C.S. Lewis admits that Odysseus, for example, loves Penelope as he loves the rest of his home and possessions. In the same manner, in my 1995 essay, Women in Achebe's World, I opine that as wives, Umuofia Igbo women came in multiple numbers, sandwiched between yam brands and titles. Therefore, Greek, Roman, and other world cultures, including the Bible itself, have always been a quarry filled with misogynistic animal images of women stereotyped as castrating femme fatale. characters that caused men's downfall. So yes, world cultures, ancient and modern, have not overtly appreciated or recognized women's contributions to nation building. Even the United States, as diversified and developed as it is, has yet to elect a woman president. Right now, Hillary Clinton is on the pathway to becoming the first elected woman president in America, and pillaring her, really, giving her double standards because she's a woman. And so, yes, Igbo nation has not yet accorded deserved recognition to Igbo womanhood for her contributions to nation building. And so the source, nature, and extent of female subordination and oppression have constituted a very vexed problem in African literary debates. As has been stated before, writers such as the late Igbo literary icon and first female African novelist Flora Nwapa have insisted that the image of the helpless, dependent, unproductive African woman was one ushered in by European imperialists whose women lived that way. On the other hand, another Igbo expatriate, writer Rose Ure Mezu, along with other critics, maintains that African and Igbo women were traditionally subordinated to sexist cultural mores, and I will ally myself to the latter camp. I believe that in creating a masculinist society, for instance, in Achebe's fictional Things Fall Apart, An Arrow of God, Achebe was merely putting literature to mimetic use, reflecting existing cultural traditional mores in his fictional portraits of women. And colonial rule merely aggravated the situation by introducing a lopsided system in which African men received a well-rounded education that will serve them to take over the reins of government in the colonial civil service, while the women were sent, their wives were sent to domestic science centers to learn crafts and skills that will kind of prime them and position them to be helpmates to their men. The wives of people like icons like Nigeria's first president, Nnamdi Azikiwe, Honorable Nnamdi Azikiwe, Nigeria's first premier, the Igbo Michael, Dr. Michael Opara, and Dr. Akanu Ibiam, governor of Eastern Nigeria. Their wives derived their identities from their husbands, so very few women were offered any colonial appointment into government. Only in the 1950s did an Igbo woman, Chief Mrs. Janet N. Mokelu, get an appointment along with Chief Mrs. Margaret Ebo into the Eastern Nigerian House of Chiefs. So apart from the communal one, Igbo women did not have a life, a room, a space of their own in which to function independently, as Virginia Woolf could have said. The role of Igbo women, even in the post-independent politics, has not sufficiently reflected the massive support that Igbo women have given to nation building through women organizations, market organizations, female wings of political parties, even as late as 1978, when I was the only woman appointed in a 22-member government cabinet. So therefore, in my book, my 1994 Women in Chains, Abandonment in Love Relationships, I will apply to the Igbo society critic Adrian Rich's nuanced description of patriarchy as, I quote, the power of the fathers, a familial, social, ideological, and political system in which by direct pressure or through tradition, law and language, customs, etiquettes, education, and division of labor, men determine what parts women shall or shall not play, and the female is everywhere subsumed by the male. So, the power of patriarchy is best exemplified in the fictional world in Achebe's Things Fall Apart, in which patriarchy intrudes oppressively into every sphere of existence. It is an androcentric, man-centered world where the man is everything and the woman is nothing. In domestic terms, women are quantified as part of men's acquisition. As wives, women come in multiple numbers, sandwiched between yam barns and titles. An example is Ogbuefi Ndichie Nwakibia, who has 3 yam barns, 9 wives, and 30 children. And he is the one who has the highest but one title in the land. So the society that Achebe is describing was an agrarian one, in which crop, the yam, is synonymous with virility because it is so hard to maintain and plant and harvest. And women's crop is called the cocoyam. So even yam and cocoyam are genderized. Consequently, to produce an abundant harvest, the traditional farmer needs a good workforce. And who constitutes the good workforce? The women and her children. Mind you, traditional Igbos did not keep slaves. So it was the many wives and their many children who would constitute the workforce in agrarian society. In 2 interviews, I tackled Chinua Achebe, the iconic novelist. I tackled him by asking him about what I called his negative portraiture of women. And he answered, and I quote, "All along, my vision of a woman's role has been developing," he said, "growing in intensity as the role of the Igbo woman has been growing in Igbo society." And I asked him why Beatrice, in Anthills of the Savannah, his novel, Beatrice was an Oxford-trained woman, and yet she was not part of the male cabinet in government. She was given the role as comforter of the men characters. And he answered me, he said, "And who is to blame?" That's what Achebe asked me. "And who is to blame?" You see, he says, many people do not read fiction the way it should be read, as representing what is. And this is what he calls the truth of fiction. They think that fiction should be what ought to be. Fiction is not a political argument, he continued. My books, merely showed what there is. If I had been Sam, the governor, he said, I would have made Beatrice a member of the cabinet, but I was not Sam. I'm telling a story that illustrates that society had a huge flaw. What he's saying is that his style of literature is not prescriptive. He's not prescribing, this is the cure, this is what should be. He said, is presentational and presenting society as it is, so that when you read my fiction, you say to yourself, oh, yeah, that's true. He says that's the truth of fiction. Who then is the Igbo woman? I don't know if Dr. Yvonne Chama, and I see her coming in, I don't know if she remembered about Nico Mbaga's sweet mother, if it's available. But if you close your eyes briefly, and I ask you, briefly close your eyes, you, my wonderful audience, activate your imagination. You will see before your mind's eye the image of an Igbo woman in her personhood, in the full flowering of her woman being. Try and let the haunting lyrics of Nico Mbaga's immortal sweet mother sweep over you comfortingly like very warm water in cold harmattan. When I dey cry, my mother go carry me. She go say, my pikin, wait till you dey cry, yeah, right? We all know that. Stop. Make you no cry again, oh. When I want sleep, my mother go pet me. She go lie me well for bed, oh. She cover me cloth, sing me to sleep. Sleep, my pikin, oh. If I no sleep, my mother no go sleep. If I no chop, my mother no go chop. You know they tire, eh? Sleep. And he says, you fit get another wife, you fit get another husband, but you fit get another mother? No! And then he says, if I forget you, my mother, therefore I forget my life and the air that I breathe. So Nico Mbaga's lyrical sweet mother literally sums up a true Igbo mother, both in her womanhood and in her selfless personhood. And so I can safely stand before you and say that Igbo woman being, the title of your conference, conflates all of the other essences and beingness of the Igbo woman. Personhood, wifehood, mother being, all conflated and subsumed into woman being. It's because of that title, that word, woman being. I'm a creative writer, but I hadn't coined it. I read it and I was lost, and I had to come. And so Chinua Achebe was right in asking, and who is to blame? Indeed, who is to blame for not giving Igbo women their rightful place in the history of Igbo nation, in the history of Africa, and now in our global digital media-driven world? To a large extent, the responsibility falls squarely on the shoulders of Igbo women, because they have always been and are the only ones who know where and how and why the shoe pinches. For ultimately, neither self-definition or reclamation of autonomy, nor even self-fulfillment is ever handed to anyone on a platter of gold, or to any woman, or to any Igbo woman. The power to self-actualize remains the preserve of any woman, any Igbo woman who is talented and industrious, who is brave and resourceful, who is disciplined, and above all, who is imaginative. With self-actualization, women can then dictate their own terms of engagement within the family, the community, and the society. And Alice Walker is right. African-American novelist Alice Walker is right when she describes a woman as a woman committed to the survival and wholeness of an entire people, male and female, and as one who loves herself besides. But then, this has always been the weakness of the Igbo woman. As one who loves herself besides. She has never really loved herself besides. Have you ever wondered why it is that Igbo women, or women anywhere, can never come together to form a political party, for instance? It is because of their committed love for the survival and wholeness of her entire people. Because of her allegiances to her father. Every daughter has allegiance to the father. And then next to her husband. And then her brothers, her sons, her grandsons. She supports all of them first and foremost. And so the Igbo woman's self comes last because of her woman being. That's lyrical, complete, rounded essence of beingness, woman being. Think about what it means. So Igbo women must define themselves, dictate the terms of their own representation within Igbo community and the wider world. Because the axiom says charity begins at home. Therefore, every Igbo woman who has knowledge and ability must begin setting right female issues, starting from her home with her own personhood and with her own woman being. And so to this effect, one must examine Igbo women's activities and place their experiences at the center of formal critical analysis so that thought and action can work together to engender a theory. This way, the personal and the private can become political and public. The notion that a woman is first and foremost an individual, a person, is at once traditional and liberal. Since even traditional religions, like Christianity, recognizes individual male and female salvation, no Christian husband stands before God to answer for his wife. The wife will speak for herself. And the specificity of any Igbo woman as a subject being, her woman being and personhood, these essences, as I've indicated, include wife being and mother being. They should be part of every liberal theory, since women are individuals first and foremost, even if they don't act it. And so I keep saying patriarchal culture, as well as colonial society, largely marginalized Igbo women, which was the way culture was set up in those days, so women acclimatized to the way things were and functioned within the established male-oriented social structure. So by means of a theory of poetics, which I define as womanist creativism in my 2004 book, A History of Africana Women's Literature, I was able as a scholar to re-examine the roles that women played in history of Igbo nation building from the dawn of creation and conclude that although not many, these women were predominantly magnificent women of courage, industry, and imagination. And the task I set for myself was to reclaim the voices of these strong, capable women who live their daily lives, not suffering as passive victims of social inequities, but really as women who made their communities sit up and take notes of their dynamic personality and creative force. And thus I could codify in a book these achievements of women which male literary history has hitherto suppressed, ignored, or denigrated. Engaged in this tour de force, I discovered that my own personal history has also become liberal, public, and political too. I grew up in Port Harcourt in Nigeria, the historic Garden City by the Atlantic. It's also and still remains an exciting metropolis, rich in oil, very cosmopolitan, with hybrid population from every corner of the globe. Safe in my world, secure in the protecting love of my parents. The woman question was never in my consciousness. As a young girl, I thought the world was the way it was and should be. I was young, I was safe, and I was happy. Life was an adventure. I didn't know what color I was because such issues did not impinge on my consciousness. But now, my sainted mother, Besi Chege Okeke, was always there for us, her children. She was loving, she was organized, disciplined, busy at home, in the farm with her other business ventures. She had farms, and she produced sheaves of vegetables very early in the morning, and people took it to the market to sell. Our house in the morning was a beehive of activities when I was growing up, full of fragrances and full of the aroma of cooking and baking. For my mother also taught other women to bake cakes, which they call make me well, eat and come. Additionally, my mother was involved in native soap making and produced laundry detergent, bars of ncha soda. Again, fellow women far and wide came to learn this trade and silk from my mother. Later, my mother left this trade and, helped by my father, went into the cloth business. Helped by my father because he needed more capital. And so she set up her selling cloth business. And I learned to recognize and help her sometimes sell cloths of akwete. I thought, do I have the akwete? Do I have the akwete? Please bring it out. I learned to recognize cloths of akwete, Intorika, Jaquel, Hollandaise. Any Igbo knows what these things are. Later, as a literary theorist, I came to recognize this industrious woman who is my mother as a community other mother, functioning in the wider Igbo community, and her empowering cultural and economic activities as a pace-setting, pioneering entrepreneurship, an effort to establish a truly viable cottage industry. So cloistered, so protected, so young, I grew into a young adult, still knowing nothing about the woman question, which is feminism, la femme, French for woman, feminism, woman question. But believing that every marriage should be as companionate as was my parents', and that every woman was and should be as loving, strong, reliable, and resourceful as my mother, Besi Chege, was. My mother's woman being, I will come to discover, was actually a pattern of traditionalist Igbo female activism that was in conflict with Western designs for African womanhood. But all these millennia, Erimbe, women like my mother have lived their normal life irrespective of existing sexist, social, and cultural conditions without labels, without knowing labels or categorization. So when at last I stepped away from Western books, I finally became aware of my Igbo-ness as a black woman writer. I can only recall very negative words heard at the Oguta-born first woman novelist, Flora Nwapa, because in Efuru, she dared to set center stage a woman who took charge of her own, determining her own existence. Yes, failed marriages. Yes, she had a child and it died. And so in a society that was defined by wifehood and motherhood, Efuru will say to herself and encourage other women to say, we are useful, we are still worthwhile members of the world of society, regardless of failed marriages or childlessness. In time, I will come to Europe and America to rediscover my Africanness. When I was in Africa, I didn't know I was African. I thought I was just Rose Ure Mezu. But I came to America and Europe and discovered I was African. And I will have a total of 11 children. Become the first woman commissioner in old Imo State government of Sam Mbakwe. I will be charged with charged with a subsidiary, but I developed it into a Ministry of Social Welfare, Women and Children's Affairs. And so I will be in a position at last to confront and try to change the daily oppressions and marginalization of Igbo women. As a commissioner for 4 years, these experiences prompted me to organize cultural campaigns throughout all of the local governments for the proper treatment of children and women, especially widows who are subjected to untold affronts. You need to be a widow in those days to know what they could do to you. Your husband wouldn't have died of natural causes. Oh, you must have done something. And they will treat you so harshly. And we had to stop that. We had to stop the fact that there was such an excessive dowry system that young girls were literally sold into marriage. I have 7 daughters. They're all married. We never asked for dowry so that she can maintain her personhood. So all these were defining experiences in my life. After my tenure in government as a commissioner, I went back to the university and I tried to put all this new first-hand knowledge of the different cultural categories into a proper theoretical framework. So my quest for my PhD brought me into contact with feminist theories and multiple critical perspectives, leading to a serious critical analysis of my own life. I started questioning the life that I had led. I didn't know. It opened my eyes, reading books by Friedman and all the others. Opened my eyes to who I was and what I should be and what I can be. And then I started re-examining the lives of which other men and women around me lived. And I would then put them into proper theoretical framework. And then I discovered a wonderful thing, that indeed, I do qualify as a strong woman, like my mother. I was one of those strong women who had multiple responsibilities. Can you imagine raising 10 surviving children to be PhDs and engineers and pharmacists and all? That took a lot of effort, so I did that. I discovered I overcame challenges like my mother, who for a total of 14 years struggled with barrenness and childlessness and still survived. I realized that reclaiming Igbo and African women's intellectual tradition involves examining and reevaluating the everyday lives, ideas, and activities of Igbo and other Black women who normally were not considered intellectual, indeed, whose lives were deemed insignificant or largely distorted or even completely ignored. I was then able to articulate into proper theoretical discourse the lives of these women who lived restricted, exploited, and battered lives, who suffered betrayal from husbands and sometimes from even their children. I began to re-examine the bruised lives of girls like my girlhood friend, Florence, who were sold weeping into marriages to men who were old enough to be their grandfathers. And so their lives were consequently blighted or stunted forever. Then my husband and I, we vowed to set all of our 10 surviving children on the path of acquiring the highest level of education, a true knowledge that empowers and that will always serve to connect that empowered self to the greater community in order to stimulate social change. Only education and enlightenment can do it. And that was Women in Chains, my second book. And so the specificity of these cultural issues rendered the universalism of Western feminism irrelevant to the Igbo woman because feminism as a white middle-class woman's ideology failed to address the specifically cultural living conditions and interests of Igbo and other Black and non-white women. It therefore became necessary for any poetics or any theory on Igbo or African women's lives to disengage itself from feminism and transform into womanism, a concept set up to correct misconceptions, redefine African womanhood, and place it in its own specific cultural space. Thus, my second book, Women in Chains, Abandonment in Love Relationships in the Fiction of Selected West African Writers, the literary offspring of my foray into advanced academia, became the medium for me to document those incredible insights into society which I had gained as a government commissioner in charge of social welfare, women, children, and the handicapped, and to critically revisit Igbo and Africa's social institutions and some of its ancient culture-based and yet sometimes mythic and misogynist beliefs, such as who in a marriage is actually responsible for barrenness or infertility. Sometimes it is the husband, but you wouldn't know it from the way the Igbo women suffered in the past. And polygamy. The ills of polygamy abound. Because it's never the woman who had the choice. It's always the man who has the choice. It's always the man who is catered to by several women, sometimes who are at daggers drawn against each other. And so some of these things I revisited showed me that from beginning, from Erimbe, Igbo women were actually very agile, very hardworking. They were engaged in transmitting culture, promoting culture and trade. They were engaged in fish drying, garri making, salt production. They were also diviners and priestesses. They were also health workers. They were midwives. They were midwives who my mother said sometimes when they knew that triplets or quadruplets or twins were in the making, hid it among themselves. And in the morning, a woman could open her door to discover one child or two children laid at her doorstep. And that way, they tried to control population and tried to minimize the incidence of twins who were thrown away. Women were also engaged in weaving. And part of your conference would also talk about the Aba Women's Riot. They call it a riot, but it was the first really organized, cohesively organized effort for women's collective activity that yielded swift and vigorous results because they organized, they were able to confront the colonial government who promptly stopped the poll tax they laid on them, on top of their husband too, and they were able to cause the downfall of several warrant chiefs and then have a voice in the appointment of others. And so, in some ways, I've been told that time is passing, so I will move on to the Igbo woman being and the digital age. As a woman of the verb, Asiya Jeba, who is an wonderful Algerian writer, will call people like us women of the verb, women in movement. You're able to move through your books to different frontiers. And so this is our age, when women's writings can then be codified and more or less emptied into the internet to exist as audio or ebooks. Dr. Chioma Mbanefo, if you go to her Learn Igbo Now, once you click it open, what comes out is no, which is welcome. And then she starts taking you through alphabets and reader. And so with writers and educators like her, like Louisa Uchum Ebunike, like one of your other keynote speakers, Ned Okorafo, or all the others, there is nothing why our books will not be all over the internet. I think from 2000, 2001, there is a Resource Africa Center that has been featuring women's stories from Biafra. And so one man actually called Howard Gardner, talks about multiple intelligences, which he categorized into seven overlapping interdependent categories, linguistic intelligence, and so on and so forth. And it says it is involved in mythic and cultural interpretation. And that's what Igbo women had done in Rimwe. Gathered the myths and legends and folklore together, nurtured civilization through their children, and their children pass on to the other children. And so we are really engaged in this. Because she comes from the earth. We have the poet, Christopher Okibo, who is Igbo, acknowledging women's role and women in Heaven's Gate. Before you, my mother, Idote, he said, naked I stand, a prodigal, leaning on an oil bin and lost in your legend. And so I keep saying that in this third millennium, we will be relevant, not just for what we have done in Rimwe, but what we can do in these future horizons without borders. It's a world without borders. That's what the digital age. It made the whole world shrink into one global village. And to do this, you need imagination. As a writer, I think I'm also one of the activists propagating culture and knowledge through imagination. And imagination is the one thing that can guide you, is the one thing that can illuminate your pathway through the human journey, which involves the search for truth. All writing is actually a search for truth. That's what writing is. And writing, when you couple it with imagination, takes you deep down. And what you offer to people is your vision of the world. French will call it vision du monde. Vision of the world, your perspective, your truth. My truth doesn't have to be your truth. And you don't have to accept it, but it is my truth. And my womanhood, my woman being, my personhood empowers me to proclaim it fearlessly. This is my perspective, and I give it to you. And so I would like to actually close with a poem I constructed for this conference. And with Igbo women functioning the way that they could and they should, through their valiant efforts and through their prowess and skills and talents, we can produce a new world using our multiple intelligences. The English will say, how marvelous, this new world. And we are standing on the threshold of a borderless world. French will say, ke meve yo. Igbos will say, oh, maka, odiegu. Say with me, odiegu. Oh, maka. And indeed, how wonderful for me in this particular age, at this moment in time, to be a woman, a wife, a mother, a writer, an Igbo Nigerian African woman, a black woman writer, in the full flourishing of my personhood and woman being, whose art of scribbling down thoughts, wielding ideas, says for all time that I have lived my truth, the truth of my Igbo woman being. How wonderful to celebrate with pride the truth that globally we are all women. We are all women, that we are black or Asian or Caucasian women, that as Igbo Africana women, we can, through the use of multiple intelligences and of cultural writing, re-enter the public global square of civic activism, inspired by the strength and resilience of our mothers, the Igbo African women of the past. And thus we are empowered to dream of a future in which an Igbo African woman can occupy the highest office in Igbo land in Nigeria, can infuse new life into the historic African continent, and can make our entire world right once more. Therefore, our celebration of Igbo personhood and woman being it shouldn't be for one day, or 3 days, or 1 month, or 1 year. It should be every minute, every day, every week, every month, year after year. As part of my homage to my people, Ndi Igbo, I dedicate this poem to Igbo woman being. You are Igbo woman, I say. Although you could scatter, you often prefer to gather. You could strike out in your own quest, yet you balance in the home. Balance in the home is your quest. For you, my dear, are eternally Igbo woman. You shoulder the burdens of the ages with the patient wisdom of the sages, the tripod task of man, woman, and child is a juggling act worthy of an elf itself. But we all know you are capable, Igbo woman. Although most often there is no appreciation, yet you people the earth as if by proclamation, reaping in return nothing but fearful domination, but eternal Igbo woman, march on to life's termination, because ordained from on high, you are the Igbo woman. It is only the strong who know how to stoop. It is only the brave who pretend to lose. It is only the kind who suffer and yet smile. It is only the wise who can quell life. It is only you, creator, nurturer, worker, Igbo woman. It is only you, my dear, who are Wonder Woman. Since the dawn of life, you are made scapegoats, yet across the ages you carry a great workload. But say, if one day you decide to proclaim a strike, then it will dawn on all that you are the pillar of life. Indestructible, irreplaceable, irrepressible, capable, eternal, wonder, Igbo woman. You are Igbo woman in the full flowering of your womanhood. Igbo kwenu.